There's a new battle on the streets of Britain, fought with flags and calls for deportations and fear-mongering about immigrants.
Social feeds are erupting with claims. Migrant hotels on fire, massive crowds taking over the streets, emergency sirens cutting through the night. The numbers are huge. The language is frantic. Yet officials remain silent. Why? People are showing up to buildings they say are changing their neighbourhoods, demanding answers they have waited years to hear. Others inside those buildings are quietly packing the same bags they once fled with, wondering if fear has found them again. But here is the part no one online can agree on. How many hotels are actually burning? How big is the crowd? And who, if anyone, is pulling the strings? Whether this is a protest, a panic, or the start of something no one expected, the truth is still forming. And what becomes clear next will decide how all of this ends.
Tensions ran high in the streets of Liverpool between anti-immigrant UK independent protesters and activists from the British organisation Stand Up to Racism. There was a large police presence, but they couldn't prevent the two from clashing. Arrests were made.
Protesters in Belfast hurled explosives across so-called peace walls. Earlier, a bus was hijacked and set on fire. Police said over 50 officers had been injured in clashes with crowds.
A Belfast afternoon that did not feel ordinary. It started without speeches, without a plan, without a leader. By mid-afternoon, groups were already moving toward hotels known to house asylum seekers. No single event had triggered it, just a slow build of frustration over weeks, now breaking open in the streets. One message read, "Meet at 6." Another said, "This is your city too." By the time police repositioned, they were already behind the curve. On one side, locals furious over housing shortages, rising rents, and years of unanswered questions. On the other, buildings full of migrant families, unaware of the posts circulating online calling them the problem. A few hundred turned into thousands. Camera phones lit up, streets clogged, the temperature of the city changed. The rumour that outran reality. A single flare caught on video arced toward the roof of a hotel near the west side. The clip was shaky, the angle unclear, but within minutes it was everywhere. 37 hotels on fire. 100,000 in the streets. That was the headline on social media. Unverified, unconfirmed, but too late to take back. Fires did start, how many? No one could say yet. Police pushed crowds back. Fire crews arrived under escort. Protesters shouted. Some ran, others filmed. Inside the hotels, people packed bags. Some had fled war zones. Now they were watching smoke from their windows, wondering if it had followed them across borders. One worker later said they were calm, but their hands were already shaking. Not all the fires were real, but the fear was. And on that night, fear moved faster than the facts.
Please do this, are ya? Traitors, mate, a lot of you. This is our country. You should be here standing with us.
When fire appears in the frame, eventually rumour and reality touched. Fires did start, flames did mark the edge of the skyline, sirens did cut through chants. Fire engines and police vehicles did push through streets, narrowed by bodies, even as crews fought the flames. No one could agree how many buildings were burning or how the first sparks began. Outside one hotel used for migrant housing, protesters gathered with banners. Some wanted the hotel closed, some wanted the people inside moved, some just needed something visible to shout at, because the systems that shaped their struggle were slow and invisible. One witness swore they saw a flare arc toward a window. Another said the danger had always been inside the building. A third only knew that by the time they looked up, smoke was already crawling into the night. Inside that hotel were people who had already run from fire once. A family who left a town where explosions greeted the morning. A man whose last memory of home was roofs glowing orange. Children whose dreams were already crowded with too much fear. For them, sirens did not just mean emergency, they meant memory. A charity worker later put it simply. They see a migrant hotel, the worker said. Inside it is just people who carried their lives in plastic bags instead of suitcases. And tonight the bags are packed again and waiting by the door. The flames were real. The fear was real. The The claim that dozens of hotels across the city were burning was not. But when you can smell smoke on your own street, you do not argue with numbers. You look for a way out.
One of people throw a fire near my head. One of people, woman, shout to me and talk bad word. Tell me, you.
The people behind the phrase migrant hotel are me. The phrase migrant hotel sounds cold and technical. Step inside and it changes. A corridor smells of disinfectant and boiled rice. A door is held open by a worn trainer because the window barely opens. A child lines up donated toy cars along the skirting board. A teenager who once filled a bedroom with posters now sleeps beneath a bland picture that came with the room. These are not invaders. They are people stuck between the place they fled and the place they hoped to belong. The hotel is not luxury. It is limbo. Some have been there for months, counting letters that bring no answer. Others arrived only days ago and are still dizzy from new rules and new weather. Tonight, they are also listening to the chants outside, feeling the ground tilt again. One resident whispered it to a volunteer. We left danger, they said, and danger followed us here, wearing different clothes. Whatever anyone believes about migration policy, burning the places where people sleep does not repair a broken system. It only adds more broken people. Crowds that share pavement, but not purpose. To stand at a major junction tonight is to see many types of anger compressed into one moving shape. There are long-term residents who feel they have been queuing forever for housing, for medical appointments, for support that never quite arrives. They look at the hotel and see a symbol of a state that can be generous to strangers, yet slow to the people who paid into the system for years. Their signs say, "Remember us." There are young people for whom this is the first large demonstration they have ever attended. They came because a friend came. They came because life has felt flat and powerless. And here at least they feel part of something, even if they are not entirely sure what that something is. There are organised activists who have spent years campaigning against migration in general. They arrive with prepared slogans and a clear narrative that outsiders are to blame for insiders' pain. They know where the cameras are. They know which phrases will travel farthest online. And there are counter-demonstrators standing not far away with banners that say refugees welcome and no one is illegal. They did not come to fight. They came to shield, to stand between vulnerable people and the worst that a fearful crowd can unleash. All of these groups share the same pavements. They jostle for space at the same barricades. To a helicopter camera, they may look like a single force. On the ground, they are neighbours and opposites pressed together. That closeness is dangerous because in the dark, a chant from one group can be mistaken for a threat from another. A shove can quickly become a surge. And somewhere between slogans shouted at a building and stones thrown at a window, a line is crossed that many will later claim they never intended to cross. In that moment, police presence becomes not just expected, but critical. Holding the line without breaking the city. Tonight, the officers on duty carry more than equipment. They carry the responsibility of keeping fear from turning into irreversible harm. They position vehicles to form gentle walls around hotels. They create corridors for fire crews to reach flames. They stand in thick lines between protesters and counter-protesters who are only one angry step away from colliding. Their instructions are simple in wording and complicated in practice. Prevent escalation, protect life, uphold the law. Some in the crowd shout that the police are defending migrants instead of their own. Others accuse them of standing back while hateful chants echo against hotel walls. Counter-demonstrators demand stronger action against those who promote violence. No move is seen as neutral. Every decision is read as taking a side. Arrests do happen. People are led away, some still yelling, some suddenly quiet. As adrenaline fades, injuries occur, an officer hit by a thrown object, a protester knocked down in a rush. Someone whose only aim was to film events finds themselves pulled to the ground by the weight of bodies pushing in opposite directions. On paper, this is public order policing. In reality, it is human beings in fluorescent jackets trying to prevent a night of tension from tipping into tragedy. But beyond the sirens and the shouting, the story is also being written elsewhere, in a place no officer can reach. The city on, screens that does not match the city underfoot.
The smiles here is masking the anger.
While feet pound the pavement, fingers tap on glass. While chants echo through streets, captions shout louder from social feeds. Clips from different corners of Belfast are stitched together by strangers into a narrative that says entire districts are ablaze. A single burning bin behind a hotel becomes, through selective framing, a full building engulfed. A crowd at one junction is looped and relabelled again and again as if it fills the entire city. People hundreds of miles away watch and type messages that range from horror to congratulations. Some call it an uprising, some call it a disgrace. Some cannot tell what they are seeing, but they share it anyway because shock feels like participation. Fact checkers and local journalists try to thread their corrections into the conversation. This video is from another year. This building is not a hotel. This number has no source. Their words are careful, their tone measured, but nuance moves slowly. Emotion races ahead. In comment sections, anyone who calls for calm is accused of downplaying the crisis. Anyone who condemns arson is accused of siding with elite. Anyone who expresses fear for migrants inside the hotels is told that they care more for strangers than for neighbours. The digital version of Belfast tonight is not a reflection. It is a distorted mirror that makes everything look larger, closer, more catastrophic. And that distorted image can affect what happens next on the ground. Because when people arrive at a scene expecting war, they behave differently than if they arrived expecting a demonstration. While that plays out, there is another arena trying to respond. One that rarely moves at the speed of viral clips. Comment below. Have you seen anything like this where you live? Or is Belfast the start of something bigger? Your perspective matters here. And if you want to stay updated as this unfolds, hit like, tap subscribe and turn on notifications. It helps more people see what's really happening and it keeps you in the loop for the next update.
Lying in wait for Republicans to parade through the city centre. But the violence began long before the parade arrived. Police used water cannons to fend off hundreds of Union Jack waving protesters who hurled bottles, metal.
The room where official statements are written inside government offices, the lighting is bright and steady. The language is cooler. Officials huddle around screens and briefings. They speak in phrases like community cohesion, safeguarding, operational response and policy framework. Draft statements are written, edited and rewritten to condemn the violence without inflaming tensions further. Calls are placed to local representatives, to police command, to civil society groups. Soon, a short message appears on official accounts. It denounces attacks on hotels, stresses that violence will not be tolerated, and assures the public that investigations will be thorough. Another message follows, promising a review of the use of hotels for asylum accommodation and acknowledging the pressure on local housing and services. For some watching from their living rooms, these statements sound reassuring. For many on the streets, they sound late and thin. One staff member, speaking off the record to a journalist, puts the disconnect into a single sentence. Inside these walls, they say, we are arguing about how systems should operate. Outside, people are arguing about whether their daily lives feel survivable. Policy debate and protest do not share the same tempo. One moves in months and years, the other erupts in hours. If the two rhythms cannot be brought closer together, nights like this will not be rare. They will be recurring. A city split between those insulated and those exposed beneath the noise. The deepest fault line running through this night is not simply between locals and migrants, or government and citizens, or left and right. It is between those who feel shielded from the harshest economic winds and those standing directly in the gusts. There are households where rising costs are an annoyance, a reminder to plan a bit more carefully. There are households where rising costs turn decisions about heating and food into calculations of survival. People in both types of homes may live on the same street, ride the same bus, nod to each other in the same shop, barely realising how differently the storm hits them. In one building on one side of the road, a local family is wearing layers of clothing indoors and restricting heating to a single room after sunset. In another building across the road, a migrant family is doing the same. Different passports, same shivers. Yet instead of seeing the shared struggle, some are encouraged to see competition, to believe that every pound spent on one group is stolen from another. That solidarity is naive and suspicion is sensible. Hardship should be drawing people together in mutual understanding. Instead, it is being weaponized to push them apart when a hotel becomes a symbol rather than a shelter, when a neighbour becomes a threat rather than a person. A city begins to erode from the inside. The direction Belfast chooses after tonight will determine whether that erosion continues or is repaired. 3 roads the city can take from here. From this unsettled moment, 3 broad paths stretch out in front of Belfast. The first path is the heavy hand. More restrictions on where and when protests can occur, larger police operations around any building designated for migrant accommodation, harsher penalties for public disorder. This route might bring visible calm, at least for a while, but beneath the surface, resentment would continue to grow, convinced that force is being used to silence frustration rather than to address its root causes. The second path is the honest reckoning. This one is more difficult and slower, but far more promising. It would involve government leaders standing up and clearly acknowledging the strain on housing, on medical services, on local infrastructure. It would require transparent plans to reduce reliance on hotels for asylum seekers, to speed up application decisions, and to invest in the communities that host newcomers. It would mean bringing local residents and migrant representatives into the same room, not as opponents, but as people who both need stability. The third path is the downward spiral. In this scenario, the sense that only dramatic action gets attention spreads. Fringe voices that offer simple enemies and simple solutions gain followers. More nights like this unfold, each a little hotter, each with slightly fewer people willing to argue for patience or dialogue. Politics shifts away from ballots and towards street summons and encrypted group chats where the loudest and angriest voices set the tone. Which path becomes reality is not decided by one speech or one fire or one protest. It is decided by a series of choices made in the hours, days and weeks that follow. And those choices belong not just to officials or activists, but to everyone who decides what to share, what to believe, and who to stand beside. What really matters. When the flames go out tonight, people will go to sleep in hotel rooms that still smell faintly of smoke. Others will fall asleep at home with the sound of chanting still ringing in their ears. Some will not sleep at all, replaying images of fire reflected in glass, replaying words they shouted or heard, wondering whether they crossed a line or whether someone else crossed it for them. The rumours will not rest. They will continue to circle for days. Stories of dozens of hotels burned, of a city taken hostage, of an uprising too large to ignore. Some will believe those stories fully, some partially, some not at all. For many, the facts will matter less than the feeling that something fragile cracked. But beneath the debate over how many buildings were damaged and how large the crowd really was, there is a quieter truth that deserves to be louder. People in those migrant hotels want what everyone else wants. Safety, dignity, a chance to build a life where fear is not the main ingredient in every decision. People protesting outside many of those hotels, even those whose anger misfires and becomes dangerous, also want something simple: to feel that they matter, that their struggles are seen, that they are not being pushed aside. Safety and recognition do not have to be opponents. They can be shared goals. If tonight is going to mean anything beyond charred walls and viral clips, it has to become a turning point, one where conversation replaces flames and understanding speaks louder than outrage. Before you move on, ask yourself, are we calming the fire or feeding it? Tell me in the comments. What do you think would actually cool tensions instead of inflaming them? And if you want to keep following stories like this with clarity instead of panic, hit like, tap subscribe and turn on notifications. It helps this reach more people who need a clearer picture, and it keeps you with us as the next chapter unfolds.